You are live.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to a virtual meeting of the City of Dublin Architectural Review Board. The Ohio Legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to have virtual meetings. We appreciate this ability to maintain our continuity of government. For the present time, we are holding our meetings online and live streaming those meetings on YouTube. Live stream on the city's website. The meeting procedure for each case this evening will begin with a staff presentation, followed by an opportunity for the applicant to make a presentation. The board will then have the opportunity for hearing public comments. Finally, the board will deliberate on each case. In order to make comments during the meeting, please use the form under the questions and comments will be relayed to the board by the meeting moderator. We want to accommodate public participation as greatly as possible and welcome your comments on cases. These were inappropriate comments. All right, so if we will, we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance. So once the flag is displayed. Okay, thank you. All right, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, would you do a roll call, please?
Mr. Alexander?
Here.
Ms. Bryan?
Here.
Ms. Cram?
Here.
Mr. Konecki is excused, and Mr. Cotter is yet expected?
Don't know.
Okay.
Okay. So I now need a motion to accept the documents and approval of the meeting minutes. Were there any changes or clarifications that anyone wanted to suggest for the meeting minutes? Nope. Okay. So if I could have a motion to approve those and today's documents and to approve the meeting minutes from October 28th, please.
I'll move to approve the October meeting minutes and place the documents into tonight's record.
I'll second them.
Okay.
Ms. Bryan?
Yes.
Ms. Cram?
Yes.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
All right. The next item is approval of the 2021 meeting dates. Do I have a motion to approve the proposed dates?
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed dates.
Okay. I'll second it.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Ms. Cram?
Yes.
Ms. Bryan?
Yes. Okay, thank you. All right. The Architectural Review Board is responsible for review of construction and modification or alteration to any site in the review district or area subject to the architectural review under the provision of Zoning Code Section 153.177. The board has the decision-making responsibility on these cases. A swearing in of anyone who intends to address the board on any of these cases is necessary. So anyone intending to address the board on any of these cases, please stand, raise your right hand, and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this board?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on into the agenda. We have a couple of cases that we're proposing to have on a consent agenda. The consent agenda is intended to allow for expedited approval of cases where the board, staff, and applicant are in agreement with all conditions of approval. Any member of the board may remove a case from the consent agenda. The two cases that we have that are eligible this evening are case 1, which is the Tucci's addition, and case 2, which is the Ferraro Wealth Management sign. Does anyone choose to pull either of those from the consent agenda?
No.
Okay. Do we have any public comments, staff, on either of those cases?
We do not have any public comment.
Okay. So what this means is that we don't really do a presentation here. We just kind of walk through this. So the first one is Tucci's at 35 North Heist Street. This application is a request for the construction of an approximately 215 square foot addition to an existing restaurant on a point. Somebody needs to mute. Sorry. Addition to an existing restaurant on a 0.23 acre site zoned Bridge Street District Historic Core. The site is northwest of the intersection of North High Street and Wing Hill Lane. Ms. Martin is available to answer any questions this evening, if there are any. So this case had 2 waivers. Do we have a motion to approve the 2 waivers?
I'll move to approve the waivers for this case.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right. So we
Ms.
vote.
Bryan,
Yes.
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
The next motion is to approve the minor project with the 3 conditions. Mr. Barnum, are you comfortable with these 3 conditions moving forward? You're on mute.
Can you let me know what those conditions are?
Nikki?
Yeah, give me just one moment.
So I know the last meeting we had, it was just to remove the trellis. And then I was supposed to work with the city on landscaping on that side, which is primarily going to be on their property, which I agreed to do.
Okay.
Okay, so the 3 conditions are as follows. 1, that the applicant work with the city to select and install appropriate landscaping adjacent to the public walkway. Number 2, that a real estate purchase agreement is approved by City Council prior to submission of building permits. Part of that was executed at council on Monday night. Condition 3, that the applicant provide final lot coverage calculations prior to submitting for a building permit.
Okay.
You're comfortable with those?
Yep. No issues with me.
Okay, great. Then from the board, I need a motion to approve the minor project with the 3 conditions.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Ms. Bryan,
Yes.
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Barnum, you're finished. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the support.
You're welcome.
Okay. Have a great night. Thank you.
Okay. The next case is the Ferraro Wealth Management sign at 109 South High Street. This application is a request for the installation of a 4 square foot projecting sign for an existing accessory tenant space on a 0.23 acre site zoned Bridge Street District Historic South. The site is southwest of the intersection of South High Street with Penny Hill Lane. And Mr. Ridge is here to answer any questions, if there are any. Any questions? Okay, is the applicant here?
Jim Hartley.
Okay. Hello, Mr. Hartley.
I
All
did
right.
have one question on the conditions, if I could. They had requested possibly a different bracket to achieve the 8-foot clearance, and I would just ask that we could possibly reduce the sign size to achieve that clearance. Can we just make it that the sign will achieve the 8-foot clearance, whether it be bracket or reduction in the sign size?
Chase?
Nikki, chime in if you have anything to add, but unfortunately, I'm not sure that items that have not been submitted can be approved.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Well, one of your conditions was to change the bracket, and if you'll look at the photo of the design, it's not going to allow to move the sign up further. So we would, I mean, a much better solution or condition would be that the sign achieves its 8-foot clearance.
Okay.
How
So,
much smaller would the sign? What's the difference we're talking about?
well, I'm sorry. Hold on a minute. This is no longer a consent
I'm
item.
sorry, then.
That's
didn't mean to
okay.
interrupt the consensus. We can.
No, we need to go through the whole thing because there's needs to be discussion. So, Chase, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you have a presentation?
I do, yeah. I can bring that up. Give me 1 second.
Just so I can provide some clarity, if all these were agreed upon, then we could have just gone forward without the presentation. Since you want to deviate from the condition, which is fine, we need to go through the entire process. So this will take a little longer than a consent agenda.
Very
So go
sorry
ahead,
for
Jay.
your frustration.
Okay. So this is a request for review and approval of a minor project review. This is for the installation of an approximately 4 square foot sign for Ferrero Wealth Management in the historic district. The site is highlighted in yellow here. As was mentioned, it is on the west side of High Street, southwest of the intersection with Penny Hill Lane. So these just show the existing conditions of the site, and in particular, the accessory structure at the rear of the property. And so this is where, on that, especially in the middle photo here, the north elevation is where that sign is proposed to be installed. So that door you see there, it's actually proposed to be installed just above that. And then this is the proposed sign. So again, it is approximately 4 square feet, 20 inches, approximately by 30 inches in size. It is a routed HGU panel with raised inline border and graphics. Comes in 2 colors, so that'll be white and then a dark olive green. On the left side of your screen, you'll see kind of how that is proposed to be mounted. There is an existing bracket there, as the applicant mentioned. However, as indicated by the applicant, it appears as though it's going to be a 5 or so short of meeting that 8-foot clearance requirement. And so that's where that condition came from. And then this is the site plan. As I'd mentioned, this is on the accessory structure, the carriage house at the rear of the property. And you can see in red there is where the sign is proposed on the site. So this was reviewed against all applicable criteria. And again, staff is recommending approval with 2 conditions. So I'm happy to talk through that a bit more, or answer any questions you all may have. Thank you.
Forgot to unmute. Thank you, Chase. So if the applicant would, I'm not sure who I'm talking to here.
Jim Hartley with Signcom.
Okay, Jim Hartley. Thank you, Jim. If you would speak again about what you'd like to have done instead of what's being proposed.
It would be a simpler, more economical solution to reduce the sign height by enough inches to create the 8-foot clearance, or to have that option other than the bracket. It doesn't look feasible that we can create another bracket and move it up. As you'll see where it's mounted on the building, it's up against the top of the building now. So the design would remain typical of what you're seeing. It would just reduce in height. I'd just like that option. It's possible we can do a new bracket, but I would just like that option if the customer doesn't want to go to the expense of a new bracket and just reduce the size of the sign. The design would stay typical to what you're seeing.
And so just to provide some additional clarity, the Architectural Review Board can't approve two different options. They would need to approve one direction or another.
I'm sorry. There's no way we can just make it the stipulation that the sign will meet the 8-foot clearance requirement and have the basic design as seen. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be difficult at all.
I have a question. If you're going to reduce that sign by 5.5 inches narrower, like the height, it's going to be a totally different sign. It will be completely different proportions.
Okay, never mind. Let's just go with the stipulation from the board then. I apologize if that's going to create a whole problem to make the sign smaller. I apologize. I thought smaller.
No, that's okay.
Well, you would have to, if you can't just reduce 5.5 inches, it would have to be proportional. So you'd be losing 5.5 one direction and however many the other.
Yes, ma'am. I'd just like to have that option if possible. I apologize.
Well,
if it retains
I don't
the same proportions, but that's going to be a tiny sign compared to what you have.
Yes, it's a tiny sign now, and it would be tinier. I just wanted to have that option in case the customer didn't want to go to the expense of a whole new structural bracket. But if we can't have an option of that, we'll just go ahead with the board stipulation and we'll figure it out from there.
Well, another way to think about this is we can vote tonight on what's before us. And if it's, assuming it's approved, you have at least one option that's been approved. And if you and the client are agreeable to that, you could go ahead. But you could come back with a revised design.
Yes.
So the difference is we're trying to give you the option to have something approved tonight, not necessarily have to come back, because we have to see ultimately what we approve. And that's what we're talking about here. But we can approve this, but if you want to do something else, you can come back. So you have the option available.
Yes, sir. Let's just approve this. Yes, sir. Thank you.
okay. All right. So then I'm looking for a motion to approve this with two conditions. The conditions are that the applicant select a new hanging bracket, which allows the sign to be installed with a minimum clearance of 8 feet, and that the applicant apply for and successfully obtain a permanent sign permit through the building standard divisions prior to installation of the sign. So, Mr. Hartley, do you agree to both of those conditions?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a motion to approve this minor project with two conditions?
I'll make a motion to approve with the two conditions.
I'll second.
Okay.
Miss Bryan,
Yes.
Miss Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hartley.
You have a good evening.
You too. So the consent agenda items stand approved, and we appreciate the applicant's attendance, and they've all left, so we're good to go. All right. So the next item is the Historic District Task Force presentation. This is a presentation to provide an overview of the Historic District Task Force Visioning process and recommendations. Members of the task force are appointees of City Council, chaired by Kim Wei. Ms. Noble will introduce the presentation, followed by a presentation by Mr. Wei and Ms. Lannon. Ms. Noble, whenever you're ready to start your presentation.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. It's been a difficult time for us to strategically place our agenda on your plate. So we welcome your comments, and I'm going to start out with a general explanation of what the task force is charged to do. And Mr. Wei is going to start into the recommendations, and Kathy is going to join us in that same vein. So I'm going to start my presentation. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Give me just a moment.
Whoever has the dog barking, if it's not Tammy, needs to go on mute.
It is totally me, and I'm so sorry. I thought I had this under control. Jenny, do you think that you could bring this up for me?
Are you seeing it okay or no?
We are, yes, thank you. So just in general, I wanted to introduce Kim Wei, again, the chair of the task force, and Kathy Lannon as the vice chair. We've been meeting since January of this past year to identify challenges that we're having with the historic district, or generally just trying to identify whether an area plan for the historic district is appropriate. So this task force has been assigned to generally speak to whether that area plan should be readopted, which we have determined, and any other recommendations that we think are appropriate for the historic district. Thanks, Jenny. So City Council appointed the Historic District Task Force in the latter part of 2019 with the primary purpose of, again, identifying the merits of the previous Historic District Area Plan that was originally adopted in 2007. It was incorporated into the Bridge Street District project when we adopted that project in 2013, and council was slightly concerned with the massing and the density that was proposed for the Bridge Street district. So they asked the task force examine the previous area plan and propose options for a new area plan for the district. So we did gather as a group to identify typical characteristics of an area plan. Again, it's characteristics, historic preservation, housing, economic vitality. We were all encompassing these general characteristics. We did also ask that we engage with Heritage Ohio, which is a local entity that's generally encompassing Main Street programs. So we did do an intensive 3-day program with Heritage Ohio to identify their program and see if that it was acceptable for our community. In terms of the Historic District Task Force, we have members that were specifically identified by City Council that were not, I would say, typical participants of the Historic District. They generally wanted to identify people that were a broad band of views and opinions for the Historic District, which included residents not only of the Historic District, but within the City of Dublin, business owners, business organizations that were committed to the Historic District, and we actually had some youth leaders that we had with our participation. So our general timeline was the beginning of the year. January was the beginning of part of our meeting progress. We actually met until literally last evening, where we had reviewed some draft recommendations for the district. And we've met committedly to reviewing and educating ourselves with the process for the Historic District. In general, intentionally our task force, again, these are residents, and we're so appreciative of our residents and business owners that have participated, but we were literally engaged with an educational process that dealt with not only our internal process, including our fiscal division, economic development. We also included our engineering department, our Parks and Recs, as well as other various interest groups like the Convention Bureau, the Historic Society, and various entities that would play into the components and interest of the Historic District. All this educational components led up to a charrette that we had with Heritage Ohio, which was at the beginning of March, ironically before we determined we did not have any meetings at that point, but the charrette was intense. We had individual tours with Heritage Ohio. We had individual interviews with members of the task force, and we had a public meeting that shared with the public what their views are with the Historic District. So in general, our presentation comes down to a general alignment with many of the things that we've generated with this process have aligned with the Architectural Review Board. And we wanted to meet with you to talk about how those components align. And we have shared our support with and I know you're going to talk about this at the later part of your meeting, the updates that you're doing with the code and the guidelines. The Historic District Task Force has rained strong support for those efforts, and we wanted to highlight the commonalities between the two entities. And I just wanted to let you know the next steps are presenting to City Council at the December 7th meeting. So just to tee up the conversation that Kim and Kathy will have with you, we did have recommendations that are in 3 components. The first and most likely the most important is updating the historic district area plan that again was originally adopted in 2007. The second is to consider management options for the district, essentially talking about a single entity that would be a point contact for the historic district. And the third and most relevant is just to address short-term processes that we think the City of Dublin and quite frankly, the Architectural Review Board are already engaging and supporting those efforts to benefit all. So with that, I will let Kim Wei is the chair of the Historic District Task Force. And so what we've agreed upon is he would start talking about the recommendations that we have for the task force, and then we'll invite Kathy to share her thoughts in the latter part of the recommendations.
So thanks, Amy. Can everybody hear? I'll take that as a yes. I'm here to kick us off with the work of the task force. And in general, we started off very broadly talking about the district, and everybody had chances to voice their opinions about the pros, the cons, the good, the bad. And as we developed our lists of issues and opportunities, we started to realize that they started to fall in certain categories. And as we've developed the final recommendations, we've come down to 12 different categories of recommendations that we'd like to share with you that will hopefully guide the district and guide improvements to and development in the district over the next many years. So the first item that we came up with is gateways. And I know over the years, there's a lot of work on trying to define the historic district. There have been some physical things that were implemented to do that. But we felt that the district is very special and very unique, and that as someone is entering the district should know that they're in this special place in Dublin. So we hoping that the recommendation would drive some ideas around either signage, entry walls, kind of really wide open right now, but the idea of coming up with some great ideas about how to define those gateways. And specifically the gateway coming in across the bridge over the river, we felt that that's probably one of the weakest gateways, and there's a lot of curb cuts and parking and asphalt, and we thought that one needed particular attention. Next. Streetscape, a lot of conversations about Streetscape and the great presentations to the staff. And we understand the projects that are in process to help upgrade and improve the streetscape throughout the district. And that was really comforting to the task force members, knowing that that all of this is in progress. Some of the comments that fall under this category, the task force feels like sidewalks perhaps need to be made wider to accommodate more people and safe movement throughout the district. There needs to be more amenities, especially around biking in terms of storing bikes and maybe even bike service and repair areas. There was comments about the streetlights need to be similar in nature, and I think that's an issue that's being worked on. There needs to be more benches, trash receptacles, other streetscape amenities, and that they should reflect the character of the district, the historic district. And so as he thinks about implementing those and installing them, that appropriate amenities are provided. In terms of trees and landscape, because of this unique area along the river, we felt that we should focus on native species to Ohio, specifically to this kind of a riverfront area, and that the trees in this tight urban district be given plenty of room to grow. It's not only from the top of the tree, but also the bottom of the tree. And we know that in some of the improvements that are going on in High Street right now, that those measures are being put in place. Next. Parking, had a lot of question about parking in the planning world. That's always the topic everybody wants to talk about. But surprisingly enough, the task force really didn't feel like parking was an issue, and that there was parking, there's new parking being provided, but we just want to make sure that it's there, is used to the best possible manner. So kind of management of parking is really important. Creating standards for parking that are sensitive to the historic district and not just adopting some suburban standard that comes in from somewhere else. We talked a lot about technology being available through an app where you could see where parking spaces were available, so you weren't driving around the district looking for parking, and also ensuring that the parking lots are well maintained and maintained over time and upgraded as needed to ensure that they're working as well as they can. Next. As you can imagine, open space and parks is a big discussion in the historic district, and all of the great work that's being done in terms of the riverfront parks. But a big emphasis on this category is the preservation of Indian Run and the celebration of it, and making sure that it's respected and it's not impinged upon as the district develops. There's a lot of talk about also just recognizing all of the existing open spaces, public spaces within the district, and ensuring that they're well connected and that people understand where they are and how to get to them. So you basically create an open space network that people can move throughout the district and enjoy each of the different spaces for what they have to offer. We talked about identifying greenway connections throughout the district, especially from Dublin Springs Park back to High Street. So again, that connectivity of always knowing where you are as you move along an open space and then being able to connect back into the district. Creating additional open space and park areas south of 161, kind of in the south part of the district, and even the talk of really enforcing a southern anchor. And we talked about the car barn site and the McDowell property, and really leveraging those as a way to get people moving north and south. And as you move through the south part of the district, they actually act as an anchor. And we've a lot about the, as we call it, the L-shaped building at 55 South Street, and as a building that is probably doesn't really fit in. And long term, is that a site where we could actually introduce a central open space or meeting place within the district, maybe in conjunction with a redevelopment of that site? And then obviously coordination of all of the park space with the Dublin Parks and Recreation Department to ensure, again, they're well maintained and serving the district well. Next. And as I said, the Indian Run corridor received a lot of discussion, and everybody sees that as a great asset to the district. And we really want to make sure that as new development is considered, even, there's a lot of talk about the future of the school site. And we know that right now will stay a school for a while, but if it ever is developed, that appropriate setbacks and relationship of buildings to Indian Run is paramount. And we always maintain a healthy buffer between development and that as a natural resource, not only for the district, but for the whole city. And then coordination of maybe even some easements that would provide those setbacks and those buffers, but maybe those easements could become part of the system themselves and provide for multi-use paths and access to Indian Run, to the ravine, to overlooks, and really opening that up for the best use of enjoyment of the people that come there. And then the last of my little piece here is the South High Street Vitality. And this a lot had to do with creating a reason for people to come to the historic district and really enjoy it. And there's already all sorts of events that bring people there, but we felt that that's something that needed to be continued and managed, and that the more events and activities, the more people want to come there and enjoy the district. And there was a specific call out to more family-oriented activities that could bring people of all ages to the district. Kathy, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Kim. Okay. Good evening, everyone. The next item on our list was diversity of uses, encouraging mixed use development in the area, making it easy for pedestrians to move around the district. And really, I mean, we talked a lot about, building a retail climate kind of in the area that would be, unique to the district, supporting local businesses, and see if we could, investigate methods or different incentives that could help support the small businesses in the area. Maybe encourage places, businesses, like office uses and service commercial type businesses, insurance agencies, real estate agents, maybe, encourage them to have their offices on the second floor of, locations, and have more active, retail type businesses on the first floor in that area. I think that's, how about, I'm ready for the next one. And preservation, we, highlight the importance of our historic preservation in the area. And we, because there is so much development pressure within the district. We'd like to, we wanted to identify where, existing development should be preserved, and we could use that recent historic inventory to pay particular attention to any contributing properties on that inventory. We think it would be great to, if there was some office or person, somebody could help provide information about maybe different programs that could assist historic home and business owners to maintain the integrity and the character of their properties. For example, they'd be able to provide information of different grants that are out there available to historic property owners. We've of course talked a lot about demolition, and we pretty much all thought it should be considered as a very last resort, like where health and safety, are at stake. A lot of demolitions seem like they had been approved, too easily, and so we've lost a lot of historic structures. We'd like to see rigorous and strict code enforcement on absentee landlords and property owners. And another idea that was brought up within the task force was,
the possibility of, could the city condemn and purchase a derelict historic property and renovate it for, market rate purchase? Some, ideas to help keep historic buildings maintained. Next, please. Proper scale and development. The task force wanted to ensure the quaint nature of the area by, having buildings of the proper scale and massing within the district. We like to see, the ARB, zoning, the design guidelines, the area plan, code enforcement, all kind of working in concert to bring about, these results that the community envisions. We want to establish design standards that reinforce the character of the district and kind of get all these different groups working together to bring it about. Number 10. 10 was connecting the district. Let's see, ensuring. Yeah, just wanted to tie things together here. Identify, we wanted to identify opportunities for synergy throughout the district, connecting and leveraging the development patterns and activities, but from the north and the south end. Maybe focus on kind of building up some new energy on at the South High Street in the district. Make it easy for pedestrians to move about the historic district, and just kind of reinforce different connections between the historic district and the different neighborhoods. Bridge Park and the various neighborhoods around the historic districts, kind of make it easy for there to be a flow, from Sawmill Road down to the historic district, that just kind of try to make it easy for tie everything together. Number 11. Number 11 is wayfinding, ensuring that both pedestrian and vehicular movement is easily accessible. We were, we talked a lot about maybe even app-based technologies here to kind of enhance the wayfinding, and it could provide lots of information about, this could be a place where you'd roll in, maybe parking and, information about the historic district, cultural information, events, but it could be one, a wayfinding tool people could have right in their hand. Number 12 is arts and culture. We'd like to embrace opportunities to provide art and culture that represent the history and vitality of the district. We talked about encouraging art and cultural displays that celebrate the historic district, the history, the culture of Dublin, creative resources and talents of the community. And maybe work with the Dublin Arts Council and to coordinate opportunities citywide that you can that you could tie in with the historic district. You know, and also continuing to engage with the Historical Society to ensure valuable resources and informations are made available to the public in an accessible way. And here's another place that we talked about, maybe an app-based technology that could put, you know, could possibly put that Dublin historic walking tour right in everybody's hand. And, you know, you'd be able to, you know, walk from point to point, and, you know, maybe have an app that would give all that historic walking tour information. And that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Kathy. So I just reinforce a couple things in those 12 overall recommendations, and we were both reading bullets that are underneath them, and we're trying to keep this conversation. These are really firm recommendations. We spent a lot of time on wordsmith all of this, and we just want to impress on everybody that this is a set of recommendations that this task force is really committed to, stands behind, and really wants to see implemented as we go forward with the historic district. The other sentiment that I wanted to convey is there's really a feeling amongst the task force members that we're kind of losing the historic district, or what's historic about it. And recommendations that we put forward are really trying to move the needle in terms of let's not lose anything else, let's not give anything else up that's historic. And so we want to emphasize that we believe these recommendations will help this city council move the needle forward in terms of preserving what's historic about the historic district and keeping it intact, and not letting it slowly being dwindled away. And with that being said, if we go to the next slide, the other we think is really important is that there needs to be a strong management force for the historic district. And we've talked a lot about a lot of different options. And you heard earlier about our meetings with Heritage Ohio, and they have their Main Street program, which is a kind of a management entity that helps manage historic districts. That's one avenue. We think that it could also be as simply as a business concierge service that's either embedded in the Historic District Business Association or in Dublin Economic Development. That's something there to help businesses, that attract businesses, retain businesses, and get the right mix of businesses that's going to create that exciting environment that we think could be. But the third one is just hire a person, and I keep saying this, that gets up every morning, that worries about the historic district, from everything from mix of uses to the streetscape quality, clean and safe, parking, but really having somebody that's dedicated. We have a lot of organizations that care about the historic district, but we need one entity or even one person that's like the historic district manager, that everybody knows and everybody can call and knows everything that they need to know about the historic district. This is something that we think is really important. And next, and finally, the other major third category was, as Tammy said, the short-term successes. There's so many things we believe that can continue in terms of educating the community about the historic district, its history, its culture, whether it's just through tours or it's through literature or it's through an app that you can download on your phone that you can move through the district and find out about what makes it unique. Those are things that can happen right away and really help to promote the district. And then obviously we need to ensure that we get the proper governance behind it in terms of the historic district code and guidelines, and that they're aligned with our recommendations so that we can then move forward and achieve the results that we want for the historic district. So that's a lot of stuff in 25 minutes. And I'm sure that folks might have questions, and I'm going to turn those all over to Tammy.
Okay, so this is the time for the board to have any questions answered, get clarification.
I have a couple questions. This is Gary. In the bullet point about diversity of uses, I noticed there was no discussion of residential. And right now in the district, there's predominantly only one type of residential use. There's very little rental housing, very few smaller units, whereas in a lot of historic downtowns, those upper floors are being converted back to residential. And those are the kind of occupants who are more likely to walk through the community, which you're looking for, have a smaller footprint in terms of cars and vehicles, and increase the vitality. So was it intentional that was left out of the discussion of diversity of uses?
Hi, Gary. No, that was not intentional. I mean, I think it didn't get into our bullet points, but yeah, we talked about upper floors being, residential uses too.
Yeah, Gary, absolutely good catch. We had a meeting yesterday and we caught that also. The overarching title in that category, it says mixed use development. I think we got lost in that was picking up residential, and we forgot to actually list residential. So we have already updated that.
I should have known because everything else seems so thorough. The other question I had, which I know can be a little sensitive, but increasing physical density is a way, and some historic districts like German Village and Victorian Village, at least off High Street, are able to both increase density in a way that is complementary to the increase physical density, which is complementary to the character of the environment. And then, but it increases vitality. Was there any discussion of that?
We did talk about that quite a bit, and I think the new zoning prevents from doing multifamily, from what I understand. You're not talking about that. You're talking about density. So it would just be you define that in the context of the historic district. Yesterday, we talked about whether you could have multiple units on the upper floors of some of the buildings to create a more dense, like micro units or something. And I think, speaking from the task force, I think we're definitely open to that, but I'm not sure what the regulatory part of it allows us to do or will allow us to do.
Well, the staff in some of our meetings has said, and I'm going to misquote Jenny here, hopefully she's listening, but that we are open to now there's a variance process, of course, but we're open to other creative, perhaps zoning, because we've talked about where our community, the zoning transitions to the residential, but frequently along the alley and the streets where that transition occurs. Things like carriage houses that can take care of your parking requirements, but then provide some housing above. And the coverage requirement for those commercial properties is still really, really high. So you can almost cover the entire property with a building. So the zoning certainly is supportive in that sense of larger buildings or infilling the property.
I think it's a scale issue too. If you can accomplish that goal of density within the scale that's appropriate for the historic district, it's fine. I think we just don't want to lose that scale and texture that is slowly changing. So I think we would be supportive of that.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Yep.
Have people on the committee been looking at the revisions we've been making to both the code and the guidelines? Because you've made some pretty extensive changes we're recommending.
Yes, we have apprised of that, and I know several members have actually gone through it. And I don't think we've had a specific any actions around that, but we've definitely, it's been part of actions in our thinking about the future of the district.
I think it's important to do it and relatively quickly because we've now been, the ARB's now been working on both the guidelines and the code for several months, and we're really close to sending it to planning and zoning, who will then present to city council. So you've kind of got a window here that I'd encourage you to take advantage of.
Well, and
Kathy,
clearly,
if I might, I mean, sorry, Kim, I'll jump in maybe real quick and then you can chime in too. I did present the draft of the code to the group as it was going through the process, and encouraged them to watch the ARB's meetings and discussion for that and participate as they could. So we definitely have made sure that they were aware of what you all were doing, and also wanting to make sure that the recommendations in the code and the guidelines that are being made by ARB are really coinciding with what the task force is, and you're very much aligned on the things that are important to each group. So that's, if that provides some helpful background.
Okay. So one group that that I noticed you don't have on your radar, but you might want to, is and I just lost the name. What's the escalation point if somebody doesn't like our decision?
BZA.
I'm sorry?
BZA, Board of Zoning Appeals.
Yeah, yes. So that appeals group. So it's really important that they're tied into this, because because I think philosophically we agree with you for the most part, but if someone, because what we're seeing is a lot of people taking smaller properties that have been demolition by neglect, tearing them down, and then building really, really large houses. And we're losing that quaintness. If they don't like our decision, they can go to zoning appeals. And if they're not tied into this vision, then they could approve it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that's why, yeah, we kind of, made this plea that all these groups share the same vision, so that, they can all work together to keep the shape of the district.
Right, but they typically are a group that is left out of these discussions. So I think it's important that, since you're communicating across a lot of groups, that you make sure that they're included in this.
great. And I just want to reinforce what Jenny said. I think the intention of these recommendations is that all of this work that's going on right now in the city, that it all, for the historic district, that it all comes together. And so we were hoping that the recommendations would really help ARB really solidify your thinking as you're moving forward with initiatives. So I think it's all about alignment. And I think
sure. And
it sounds like we are.
I think we're pretty close, but again, I'd recommend that at least one of your members take a really good fine-tooth comb look through the code, and we're still discussing guidelines. And that, we make sure that all the groups who have a stake in this are tied in. I like your idea of a sort of a coordinator or manager. I think the devil's going to be in the details of, is that a voluntary position? Is that a paid position? If it is, who pays them? So that's going to be interesting.
It's so important. It has to have somebody that really has their heart and soul in it. Not and just I'm doing this in my free time.
Sure, I agree with you. I agree with you. Then there's the whole reporting line and who they're accountable to. So those kinds of things, I think, will be really important as well.
Yep.
I mean, I'd hate to be the guy who has to say no to city council or the city manager who does their performance evaluation,
I'll just say thanks for the presentation. I don't have a whole lot to say because Clayton Rose has been we're both on the Historical Society, so we've been going back and forth about keeping each other abreast of what we're doing at ARB versus the Historical Society. And Clayton gave me the task force draft over the weekend, and I got comments to him before your meeting yesterday. So but thanks for presenting.
Great. And we did get those comments, so thanks.
And I have to, yeah, just remember, I sincerely apologize. I forgot to move the date of this in my calendar, so that is, I'm sorry. But so I missed a lot of the presentation. But I echo some of the points that Kathy made. Is we try to kind of tie a bow on all of these things, is to make sure that we get in front of the code amendment, the things we've been working on for a few months now. Otherwise, the churn back through that is certainly would be quite challenging. So just as you say, trying to tie everybody together to make sure that the loop stays closed. And if there's other things to add in, I don't know, I'm speaking for Jenny. I don't know exactly when the time will be, but there's probably a little time left to make some adaptations. But again, I apologize for being late.
Oh, that's okay, Sean. So yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was very informative. I'm glad to see a number of these things. And I agree, alignment is really important to be effective. So I thank you for coming.
Great. Thanks for your time.
Okay. Okay. So the next case that we have is the historic Dublin stone walls. So this application is a request for an informal review based on the August 26, 2020 feedback for the construction of stone walls along South High Street from Bridge Street to John Wright Lane. The area is zoned Bridge Street District, Historic Core, and Historic South. And Mr. Ridge will be our presenter. So Chase, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. So as was mentioned, this is an informal review providing feedback on the proposed installation of stone retaining walls along South High Street in the Historic District. You'll likely recall this slide from the meeting in August, but just to kind of refresh your minds, this is the site yellow here. You'll see it stretches roughly from Bridge Street on the north end down to John Wright Lane on the south end. So I'll briefly run through the existing conditions. I'm sure you all are pretty aware of these as it is, but you've got two photos here on both the left and right kind of show the typical conditions along South High Street. You'll see the tree lawn, brick paver, sidewalk. You'll notice the tree lawn is rather narrow and provides a low soil volume. And then there's also signage and light poles, as well as underground utility lines in this area. Some other site limitations along the corridor include existing staircases, as well as historical relics. So you can see one pointed out in the left-hand photo there. Also, the corridor sees quite a bit of sidewalk root heaving due to the growth of trees with the brick paver sidewalks. And then these two photos show the existing trees along the corridor. You'll notice, especially in that left-hand photo, that the trees on the west side of the street, many of them have already been removed. So you can see that there. I'll briefly talk through the design of these stone walls. As a side note, Sean Koretsky from Parks is also in attendance today to answer a lot of any design questions you all may have at the end of this presentation. So this is the selected replacement tree. Again, I am not a trained landscape architect, so I'll let Sean speak to this. But you can see some of those specifications on the left-hand side there in terms of height and spread, shape, so on and so forth. And you'll likely remember this graphic from the August meeting as well. This is the recommended tree layout. And so north will be actually on the left-hand side of your screen here, south to the right. There are 27 trees proposed on the east side of South High Street and 25 on the west. And then this slide actually speaks a little bit to the phasing, which again, I'll let Sean get into a little bit later in more depth. But the dark green trees that you're seeing, and on the top here is a zoomed in version. And then on the bottom is kind of zoomed out, showing more of the corridor. But the dark green trees are proposed to be replaced in phase 1. And then light green trees that you see are going to be in subsequent phases. Part of this proposal includes the installation of a pavement suspension system. So this allows for a healthier street tree to grow. It allows for a larger soil volume as well as healthier soil. So again, Sean can speak to those details more here shortly. And then you'll likely recall this was the previous retaining wall design. So this design, compared to new designs, was actually longer, typically came in longer segments, was approximately a maximum of 30 inches in height, and mimicked the dry laid stone walls throughout the city. So this shows the updated options for the retaining wall plan. There are 3 options. So option A on the left-hand side of your screen is a rectangular option. It's constructed with 90-degree angles. Option B is of a chamfered or angular version of the same wall, really. And then option C is a curved or elliptical version of the wall. And so each option comes with another, I guess, a grouping option as well. So what you're seeing here is a joined grouping option. And so where possible, this option would combine walls into essentially one longer wall where possible. So you can see highlighted or pointed out with the blue arrows here are a couple examples of where those could be joined together to create a longer wall. And then this is the singular version. So each tree in this option would get its own individual retaining wall. So more gaps in the design, but again, each tree is getting its own retaining wall. And then these next few slides are renderings of the proposed designs. Again, this is option A, and this is the joined version. So you can see the long segments. You'll have a single segment as well, where joined segments are not possible. And then this is just the same thing with a mature tree versus a newer tree. And then this is the single version. This is option B, so the angular version. Again, same design concept, just with a different shape to the wall. This is the single version of the same design. And then finally, this is the curved version of the wall. So again, the joined version here, and then the single version. So this slide speaks to kind of the construction of the walls, and I apologize, this is a little bit difficult to see. But like the last version in August, the walls are proposed to be a maximum of 30 inches in height. They're actually cast concrete clad in a natural stone veneer. They'll have rake-backed mortar joints to mimic a dry stack stone appearance. And so, again, an example of this nearby is at the Ground of Remembrance to the north. And then you'll also see that the walls are proposed to be capped with a stone cap. So that is, regardless of the design option, all of them have that as well. And then staff's only recommendation is that the ARB provide feedback on the new designs. So I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have. And as I mentioned, Sean is also here from Parks to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean, do you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
One thing I wanted to add with the detail that was brought up, I wanted to point out just in the picture itself, if you look where, I don't know, Chase, if you can bring that back up, you see where the root ball is on the tree and where those suspended pavement cells are, which will be filled with soil. Why the need to push these trees down to that curb level so that those roots have access to that soil. If they sat up, halfway up the height of that wall, very few of those roots would be able to access that. And most of those, as trees, the feeder roots are in the top 18 to 20 inches, would never get down into that good soil. So I just wanted to point that piece out. Also wanted to say with the reason why we had the two versions, so we had single sets of walls and then the single and the longer walls. Part of that too dealt with the rhythmic experience as you're driving down the road. We were a little worried that having each individual tree having its own wall may get busy. So we wanted to provide that other option and thought of, we could mix it up a little bit by having two trees and then singles and break it up in that fashion. So that was really the reason for the secondary option in that regard.
Thank you.
Other than that, I think it was good.
Okay, thank you. So, board, do you have any questions you'd like to pose?
I have a question. In the last presentation, we heard how the task force, one of the things they talked about was continuity of streetscape throughout the district. And so that's more than just this section of where the trees are going. And when these trees are mature, they're going to be, I like a lot of what's being proposed, but they're going to dominate the streetscape there. They'll be more prominent than the buildings when they're in bloom. So they'll really create a very, very clear corridor. And I like lowering the grade. So the heights, even though you're planning at different times, the heights are going to be similar. So there'll be a real clear corridor. Has anybody looked at the feasibility of continuing this kind of tree planting pattern along, continuing it north on High Street and portions of Bridge Street that are in the district as one means of establishing some continuity and clear definition using landscape of the historic district?
There has been discussion about that. I think part of this is going to be to utilize this section in these phases to figure out, is this the right look ultimately? Are they going to perform and such? But there has been talk about some of those plants on the north side not necessarily being ideal. So the idea that we could continue this has definitely been talked about.
Okay, thanks.
So I see Kathy, I think, is still on. So Kathy, you might want to take that point forward. as a potential way to tie things together. Any other questions? All right, and I believe we do have a public comment.
Yes, we do have one public comment, which I will read for you. So this is from Tom Holton at 5957 Roundstone Place, Dublin, Ohio 43016. The subject is historic Dublin stone walls. The public comment is, the multiple photo renderings are very helpful. My preference is for option C, single elliptical. It appears to take less space on the slope. There appears to be less wall exposed at the sidewalk level. That would be less of a trip hazard. The single elliptical would leave maximum grass space on the slope, which to me is more appealing. Regarding installation of the pavement suspension system, what is the estimated time for construction with street closures? Is this likely to disrupt business very much with loss of parking during the work period?
So I guess to respond to the questions with regard to construction time frame, I think this is probably a couple months time frame overall to get all of it dug up, redone, and then repaved. I know engineering's talking about once this is complete, they would do a repaving project from the up at West Bridge Street or 161 all the way down to John. I can't remember the name of it now.
Right.
Southern Street, John Wright. John Wright. All I could think of was John Wayne. I'm like, it's not John Wayne. So sorry, but that's probably the timeline. Obviously, we would have to work with engineering on what the rerouting of traffic and such would be. Obviously, in the areas that they're working, you would lose parking spaces. I don't know how large of a section they would take out at one time where it would be feasible to install, or if they would try to do the entire length. My guess is they probably would do sections, maybe block by block. But it really comes down to construction sequencing, and we're not there yet. Once we kind of get through this process and we get the plans moving forward, and to what extent that would be, that will inform that length of time.
Okay.
The good thing is we were kind of back and forth on how this was going to sequence, and through this process now it'll all happen together versus initially we were kind of thinking we'll plant the trees and then after the new year we'd come in and do the actual ground, but now it can all kind of happen together. We were trying to not interrupt some of the business over the holidays.
Nikki.
So we do have one more public comment that just came in, so I want to go ahead and share that with the group. So this comment is from Garrick Daft at 21 Indian Run Drive, Dublin, Ohio 43017. The subject is retaining walls, and the public comment is, can't have trees too large and retaining walls cannot be too high.
Okay.
Nikki, could you repeat just what was it? Can't have trees? Repeat that first part about the trees.
So it says, can't have trees too large and retaining walls cannot be, or cannot be too high.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
So the one good thing about these trees is they do have the potential of getting 55 feet tall, but their spread is only 25 feet wide. So they shouldn't impact or become a problem as far as that kind of narrow way. The good thing about these trees, though, is they can be limbed up pretty high. The branching structure of tulip trees allows that pretty well. So from a standpoint of having that kind of clear, open understory, once they get to the height that they can be pruned, correct, right? You'll have that ability.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so board. Now we have discussion.
I'll go ahead and start and say I really appreciate the revised design. It is a huge improvement over what was presented before. I like the idea of just having tree wells versus trying to imitate a historic wall along the streetscape. So I really appreciate that. As far as which option, I did not like A. I thought it was too much wall. B and C, I kind of wavered on. I don't have a huge preference one way or the other. And then as far as individual and single, my initial thought was single. I get your point though, how it might break it up with the joined ones. Again, don't have my concern originally with the joined one was that if the trees grow differently or something happens to one, then it's going to look really weird when a new one is planted. So that was my initial thought was the single, but I don't have a strong preference one way or the other. I'm just glad. I definitely like this design better than what was presented before. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Amy, maybe I'm just, because you said, so you like the square one, but you like them.
Yeah, the one I don't like is the complete square, the A, okay. Because to me, the way the square looked, it was that the wall was the same height on all three sides.
No.
It does taper down.
It does taper.
Yeah.
On the sides. Oh,
that's
okay.
That's the way I looked at it.
Okay, so as long as they're all tapering and they're lower, then I guess any of them are okay. I got the impression that those were all three sides were the same height.
So just to weigh in on a piece of that, so from our engineer standpoint, I'll let you know from their design preference, they like the A and B, the square rectangular wall and the angular wall more so than the ellipse, mainly because it allows the wall to engage the sidewalk edge more, so you don't have a question where it starts to pull away from the sidewalk in the compaction and the ability to hold that back behind it. It can be done, it's just a lot more difficult to do. So that's the one caveat of this design that they're kind of weighing back and forth.
In general, I'm kind of more of a fan of the straight lines, but I think it's just going to be personal preference. You guys take a vote.
I'm the same with it. I mean, I personally like square. Okay, I'm an engineer. I like it to be square, but I took it as it was tapered to the street. So that's for me. I wouldn't want it to be I like that better, and I like the joined one as opposed to individual. I didn't think about it. I do take your point, Amy. If you have to cut one of them down, it could look a little strange for some reason. But having all individual ones, it looks, it feels choppy just looking at the rendering. But I have to admit, it's a bit personal preference on all of them.
I think my bias is because the ones that are angled look like they're done by an engineer. My preference are the curved ones because I think they look a little bit more natural and less formal and less architectonic than something that's so rigid and geometric. But I agree with Sean's point. I prefer the variation of the small well and the big well, because it just seems, when you look at that one photo and all of those small wells lined up one after the other, it just seems way too busy. And you know, even though I didn't necessarily agree with creating the wall as a sitting wall, it does provide, when you make the longer length, that option. So if during parades or even people who are going to one of these places want to sit down and sit there, I think the longer wall provides more opportunity for that too. So it's just my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think this is a huge improvement over the first. So thank you for all the time and the attention to detail. I agree with the comments above. I mean, the elliptical was my least favorite. I kind of like the angular, but again, it's personal preference. So flip a coin. And I think that given Amy's point about having to replace a tree, but I like the bigger wells and the diversity of multiple wells because otherwise it just looks too choppy, I think.
On the replacement of the trees too, something else I didn't mention. If you notice the tree and the tree name, I don't know if, well, I guess it doesn't matter. I can just speak to it versus necessarily pulling that slide back up. But it's a cultivar. So because it's called the Emerald City, when you have a cultivar tree like that, those are actually genetic. They're not clones, but they're genetic growths. So they actually take a cutting from the tree, and genetically it's the same as every other tree. The reason they do that is to get very specific results in how the trees grow. Every tree will grow the same way because it's made from the same genetic material. As the trees, granted, you'd have one small one if one died, but eventually it would grow into the same shape and it wouldn't look differently in the long run.
Okay.
Just an FYI.
Thank you. Any more?
And I just maybe had
discussion?
just one more quick, because I know in our last discussion we had a lot of question about trip hazards and stuff along the edge of this. It's hard to tell, but is it higher or is it the same as it was before? It looks like there's like more. We had a few inches before. I don't know if that's raised up above the sidewalk a little bit more now or not.
It's around the same kind of concept.
Yeah.
It's just that you have less engaged to the sidewalk.
Yep. Okay. But
you have to provide some kind of an edge to prevent wheelchairs or that from an ADA standpoint of rolling off. So you got to have something that's a minimum of 4 inches. And we don't want to get it so high that we end up having to introduce guardrails and stuff down here either.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a trade-off.
Yeah.
And it will be engaged with the sidewalk, right? So it'll sit against the sidewalk. Okay. Yep.
It won't reduce the width of the sidewalk, but it will be engaged to it.
I will say though, with the tree wells, you do have the opportunity now. There are places where you can step off. You can step into the grass still. That was my concern last time, is having that solid wall and not being able to move out of the way when someone was coming the other direction. But I like this design with the tree wells because there are places where you can move out of the way. So thank you again.
And Sean, just as a reminder, in one of these, is there light poles all the way down to John Wright Lane? The street lights?
I believe so.
Okay.
They may continue just past there, maybe. But I don't remember. I know they're at least to there.
Okay. Sean and Chase, do you have what you need from us? Because I don't know that we're actually making a recommendation on this.
No. So this was just, that's correct. Just informal review again.
Right.
Sean, if you're comfortable with the feedback you've received, then I think we're probably in good shape.
I think so. I think ultimately, whatever the pairings happen to be, I guess if we're good with any of the combinations, and then we can move forward and go back to council and ask the question from their opinion of what they want.
Yeah, so really quickly, just to provide a little bit of background, the reason we are not asking the Architectural Review Board to make a recommendation is because typically improvements within the right-of-way are not under the purview of the board. That being said, there were obviously members of council that felt that it would be important for the Architectural Review Board to weigh in on this, and rightfully so. I would like, just for clarity and in terms of reporting back to council, if maybe we could summarize the board's recommendation a little bit more succinctly,
Sure.
whether it's support or affirmation or otherwise.
I think in general, we support the changes. I think that in general, we'd like to see, as far as the layout of the stone, the angular ecliptical, I think that's, I think we're very divided in that, not in a bad way, but I don't think that that's council can make that decision. We individually like each of them. But I think that we also would like to see the larger wells rather than a lot of smaller ones. So Nikki, is that concise enough?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very helpful and will be helpful to council. Thank you.
Let me ask you a question. When you said the larger ones, we want a mix though, correct? Mix of larger and small. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Sean and Chase. So how's everybody doing? We have, it's 8 o'clock already, and we still have a lot of discussion. Does anybody need to take a couple minute break? You good to go? Okay. All right. So the next item, originally, I think we were going to do these together, but I think that given some of the discussions we've had, we're going to do them individually. So the first item is the Architectural Review Board zoning code update. This is administrative request. This application is a request for the recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission for an amendment to zoning code sections 153.058, 153.059, 153.062, 153.063, 153.065, 153.170 through 153.180, and Appendix F and G to address the Historic Dublin Boundary and Architectural Review Board development standards and procedures. I see why 4 and 5. So then the next item is the historic district rezoning. So we have the zoning code update and the rezoning. Let's go ahead, because let's go ahead and talk about the zoning code update first, because I think that these are going to be different items. So you all received the draft code amendments, changes. I was not planning to go through this page by page. You can pay me later. So did anyone have something noted in the code updates that you wanted to discuss or had questions about?
I had 2 small wording changes. And I just read the stuff in blue. Was that correct? Like only the things in blue change. Okay, so that was all I read was stuff in blue. Yeah. Okay, so the first one is on page 16. It is R contributing. Okay, and then in the second to last sentence, it's a significance of the property. The resources classified. That should, I believe, we mean significance of the district. So it's not contributing to the significance of the change property to district. And then my only other one I had is on page 25 under H non-contributing. The last sentence, it says, or the resource does not individually meet the National Register. I would just cross the word individually out. So, or the resource does not meet the National Register, because most of the things in this district aren't individually eligible. They're eligible as a district. So just strike the word individually.
I have issues with those same two clauses for different reasons. So is this a good time for me
Yes.
Yeah,
to add, Amy?
Yep, I was done. Those were my only two things.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
My point in the definition of contributing, we reference a period of significance in both clauses. One historic district in the community that I'm aware of has a very specific date. The period of significance is defined as before a certain year, but I don't think we have that. We use our historic resource, that evaluation that was done as determining what is contributing and non-contributing. Isn't that right? Isn't that what we rely on when we say something's contributing and non-contributing?
So when the historic and cultural assessment was done, they identified for each property based on, again, as they've defined. So we took these definitions from how they conducted their assessment of each of those properties. I would have to go back and look at how they defined that from a year perspective, to your point. I don't know the answer to that right off the top of my head, but.
I actually can probably answer. So the period of significance relates to how something's eligible for the National Register. They were trying to decide if it was going to contribute or not. When the consultant did a review of the historic district, so the original historic district dates, like what is listed on the National Register, is a much smaller portion than what the consultant went out and did. So the consultant did establish a period of significance. They had expanded it to include mid-century modern. So originally the historic district stopped much sooner, but they're using what the consultant defined as if we were to create a new historic district, like a National Register historic district, they expanded the period of significance. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a very specific terminology for National Register criteria. So it's not the 50-year cutoff that continually moves forward, is what I'm trying to say.
Is this clear enough? Is there enough clarity where we say period of significance that somebody can understand what we're referring to there?
I think honestly, you could just delete that portion of the sentence and it wouldn't change anything. If it's adding confusion, you could delete because it retains. You could just say because it retains sufficient integrity, and you can delete the it was present during the period of significance. You can delete that. So it would read, the whole sentence would read, the resource itself may be individually eligible for listing in the National Register, or it may fall short of the requirements for individual listing, but retain sufficient integrity to add to the significance of the district. So just delete, it was present during the period of significance, and that solves the problem. And it doesn't change the meaning of what you're trying to say.
Well, that helps me. I don't know if that creates a loophole or is a.
It shouldn't impact anything else.
Okay.
I'm fine with that if you're all fine with that.
I'm not sure. Well, I think I was clear with the first, but before, but there's not a standard definite. Now, can you say that one more time, Amy?
So all I'm saying is just, it should read, or it may fall short of the requirements for individual listing, but because it retains integrity, adds to the significance of the district. So as an individual property, it's not eligible, but it retains enough significance that it contributes to an overall district. The age of significance doesn't matter. You can delete that. And that would be the same, then you'd have to make the same change to the non-contributing one too, so that we just remove that reference from both definitions. So delete the during the period of significance part under non-contributing on page 25.
Yep.
That makes sense to you, Sean? What's
Yeah.
Okay.
I for me, it's okay. It's just not present. Yeah, I think it's okay.
Okay. Great.
Okay. In story, but we just have to So we just have to. No, it makes sense. It's just a bit ambiguous, and when it just talks about somehow somebody has to decide what lacks, right? So.
Well, it lacks integrity, so
Yeah.
it's missing the elements of integrity that make it eligible.
Yep.
So I'd make that change then to both, Amy, because that's also in the non-contributing.
Yes, yeah. So it would need on both contributing and on page 25 the non-contributing. Delete the part about the period of significance.
Anything else in the code that you all had any comments or questions about?
Okay, so go ahead.
I was just going to compliment you on the definition of subordinate.
What?
I shouldn't do this because you want to move on. I was going to compliment whoever came up with the simple definition of subordinate.
I feel like that was a joint effort, but
okay.
I appreciate that. So.
Okay, anything else in the body of the code? I think these definitions are going to be so helpful. I just think this is a document we'll all be very proud of. But, yeah. So any changes, questions, concerns about the body of the code itself?
Oh, I had one. Wait, I think, yeah, only one dog ear. And it's just a word missing on page 10 under food trucks, under 4. On the second line after the comma, it should say food trucks may not operate on property for more than 14 calendar days.
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry, I was trying to find my place here.
Okay, so food trucks 4. It's going to come right after in the second line. So it says for a property with a non-residential primary use, mixed use, commercial parcel, comma, food trucks may not operate on a property for more than 14 calendar days. So the words food trucks are missing and need to be put in there right after that comma. And that was the only one I caught. But again, only read the blue.
That's okay.
Okay.
That's the only things that changed was the blue. So
right. Anything else in the body of the code? Whoop whoop. Okay. So I'm going to ask for can I ask for a motion?
Well, the only thing, Kathy, is the code includes Appendix F, which is the map to the rezoning.
Yeah. So I just caught that.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure what the order or how we do that.
All right. So we'll go to F, which is Jenny.
And F is just the boundary. That's not assigning the zoning classification. So I know that's something that we wanted to talk about, Amy, but the F is just the boundary
itself. Yes, I am good with the new boundary. I'm totally fine with that.
Okay. And G, Appendix G, no changes were made for this meeting.
Right, correct. Those are all up to date.
All right. So this is a question for you, Jenny. So can we do a recommendation on the code that we've looked at so far and then do the zoning separate?
Yes, we can do that. Yes. And I do have one clarification just to note in the case information, when you read that in, it should have also included 153.002, which is the definition section. So I apologize, just so for the record, so that's clear.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, because that's a huge part of this.
Yeah, minor detail.
Okay.
Hey, I just have one question, Kathy. Yeah, because I remember, I was reading back my notes. I remember we were talking about, extending the district down to, I don't know what the numbers are, but farther down. And I remember we were going to discuss that with City Council. Do you remember that discussion we had that it would take in the new buildings?
Yeah.
I forget the numbers now. I have an arrow here. But
Yeah,
we talked about it. I don't remember if there was there ever a discussion about that. I think we had some discussion about
there was a discussion about it, and I think that it was like a 3-2 vote to not include them in the historic district, but to keep them as part of Bridge Street.
Okay.
And I think as we would represent, and we did in the memo also, that there was sort of conflicting, for lack of a better word, opinions about how that should be handled. So we'll carry that forward as this moves forward too.
Yeah. Because I remember it was going to go to the council and they were going to discuss in a little more detail. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, first it goes to planning and zoning, and then they take it to council.
Sure. Yep.
Okay, so this is exciting. So I need a motion to recommend approval to planning and zoning for the administrative request for a code update.
I'll make a motion to.
Wait a minute, Sean, do you have a question?
No, no, Amy's going to make a motion. I just wanted to, wasn't sure. I just wasn't sure what it was, yes or no. It's okay. I'm good. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I'll make a motion to move this forward to recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission for the administrative request of a code amendment.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Miss Bryan,
Yes.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Miss Cram.
Yes.
All right, that's a big one.
Feels like I read that 25 times.
I think you may have. All right, so the next one is we're going to be talking about the rezoning. So this application is a request. This is historic district rezoning. Application is a request for a recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission for area rezoning from the Bridge Street District to historic district designations in conjunction with the Architectural Review Board zoning code updates. So we have Greg Dale with us as well as Jenny.
Great. I will just introduce this. Greg's here again also to help if we have any questions or need any more background. So as you mentioned, this is the area rezoning, which is ultimately renaming the properties that were previously under that Bridge Street sort of nomenclature. So now, since we're removing the historic district from the Bridge Street district, we want to clarify that language. So we provided in your packet the existing zoning versus the proposed zoning, and then also a list of specific parcels and what they were being zoned to and from for your reference. And I do have a map here if that would be helpful for everybody to look at, and I can just quickly highlight what those changes are.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So again, this represents the proposed boundary that we discussed, and looking at we'll start at the top here. And we had, again, those properties with the newer development that were previously under historic transition. Our recommendation was that those be included within the Bridge Street, Scioto River neighborhood.
And I know a question was raised about that, and we can talk about that maybe when I'm all done, what the board's pleasure is on how to treat that. But we were looking for a district that was closely related to sort of the type of development as would be across the river. And that review process is through the Planning and Zoning Commission, which would be the intent as directed by council for those particular properties. The remainder of the districts, historic district public, historic district residential, historic district historic core, and then historic district historic south, would ultimately remain the same as they are currently zoned, just again losing the Bridge Street initials at the beginning being replaced with the historic district. So all those other items would be included in that's what's represented here on the map. And we did have a minor update this morning because our legend was incorrect. So just so you all know what that was all about. But otherwise it remains the same as what's there, just naming it a little differently to match the code. So I'm available to answer any questions, and we can talk through specifics if people had comments. I know there were a couple questions.
I have a question, Jenny.
Sure.
Has anyone ever considered North Riverview Street, because of the nature of what's there now, to actually be zoned similar to the other residential district across Bridge Street? Because when I look at, as we change the zoning to provide some protection for those residential properties, so they're not overbuilt, the fabric is similar, and at one time on the other side of the bridge, and at one time the fabric continued through there, and it just seems a shame that those homes aren't afforded the same protection that the zoning change provides those others.
Yeah, that's a great question. We had some internal staff discussions about that as well. Again, I agree with that assessment. I think it was one of those, as this was coming about, we had not discussed that, so we didn't want to make that categorical change without the board's discussion. So again, I'd like to hear what everyone else thinks too, but I think from a staff perspective, we would be supportive of that for that very reason. You're muted, Kathy.
I echo what Gary said. I think it's really, really important, especially considering how some of the rather interesting proposals that have come in front of us, that be a protected area and be considered historic residential. So I would totally support that. Anyone else have thoughts?
Okay, just you're on North Riverview, yeah?
North Riverview, where those little houses are.
Here, I'll point it out here on my map here. If you can still see it. So it's these 6 properties. Looks like Amy's, there you go, Amy. These 6 properties then that are currently being proposed as historic core.
Which would allow them to become commercial, which is, there are some historic homes there. They just don't have any protection right now.
I get it now. Yep. Okay.
I strongly agree with switching. I never thought it should be part of the core to begin with, and I strongly recommend putting it back to the historic residential.
Okay. Great. Okay. So when we move forward with the recommendation part, we can add that as one of our sort of amended items. Okay. Were there any other questions or concerns? Amy, I believe you did have one about the.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of putting the Bridge Park West and the library and the garage. I disagree with taking that out of historic transition. It was a historic transition for a reason. We didn't want this type of development across the river right up next to the residential district. So, I mean, unless there's some reason that, you're removing that completely and that you don't want the historic transition to exist at all. I mean, it's still in the code and there's still code guidelines for it. And I'd prefer those over the Scioto River neighborhood. Especially if you look at the table of the types of buildings that are allowed. If, who knows, 10 years, 20 years, whenever these buildings get torn down, I would rather them build what is allowed for transition neighborhood and not build the big box store that's allowed under the Scioto River. So I'm against rezoning those parcels as the Scioto River.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we were again looking for something compatible. And when we were looking at revising the Bridge Street district separate of this, historic transition was proposed to go away as a zoning district because it would be absorbed somehow else.
Yeah.
And I think at this point we
I
can wait on that and make this happen.
Yeah, I would say keep it and keep it as transition, because if and when these buildings go away, we don't, that the stuff on the east side of the river is not what we want abutting the historic district.
No.
And I support, and I think when we talked, that was my point originally. I think it's the same thing. It seems too dissimilar. I mean, I think there should be a transition and some added controls, maybe not the right word, but some added buffering to make sure that it, because there are two distinct things going on in the transition through there for me. Okay, I don't know what 20 years brings, but I agree. It could end up something that we'd end up in trying to rewrite the code to keep something out. And I think it makes it more difficult. I think changing it here is it feels, and I didn't realize, but to Amy's point, it's a bit short-sighted that today it looks like this, but tomorrow it's the entrance to the rest of the district.
I've stated my position a number of times, and I'm in agreement with what everybody's saying about this.
Okay, great.
I am as well.
Okay, so we'll note that too as another change, that would be proposed to be then.
So how do we define that area?
It would then be the BSD historic transition.
And that's what it's zoned now, so
yes,
it wouldn't get rezoned. So
right.
Okay.
It's no hardship to the property owners or those buildings. That's
right.
what they are. There's not.
Yeah.
The only one that causes this, changing the historic core of those houses to residential is our preference. The landowners probably aren't going to be too happy about that one. But there should be no problem leaving the transition. That's what they're zoned now.
Okay. So it's just, instead of making a change, it's leaving it as it is.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And I did receive some public comment when we're done with our discussion here.
Any other discussion before the public comment? Okay, Jetty.
So we received one just now from Garrick Daft at 21 Indian Run Drive in Dublin, Ohio. And his question, the case references the rezoning, and then the question is, what's the difference between the Scioto River neighborhood zone and the previous historic transition zone? And I think as Amy clarified, it allows for additional building types and potentially additional building height. And I'd have to look at the use table, but my guess is they have some additional uses that would be different than what would be allowed within historic transition. So retaining historic transition would be more compatible with just that, the transition into the historic district.
Okay, great.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Anything else anyone wants to discuss or bring up related to the zoning? Okay, so I'm then going to have two provisions or exceptions to this. One is that we move North Riverview Street to historic residential, and the other is we retain the historic transition as it currently exists. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to approve or to recommend approval to P&Z for administrative requests for the rezoning of Bridge Street District 2 historic district designations with the two specifications.
I'll move for the recommendation with our two changes.
I'll second
that.
Okay.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Ms. Bryan,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Great, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're down to the last one here, and I know there will be some discussion on this one. So this is, we're now looking at the Historic Design Guidelines, an administrative request. The application is a request for a recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission for the new Historic Design Guidelines applicable to properties located within the Architectural Review District and its outlying historic properties. So Ms. Martin and Mr. Dale will be our presenters.
Great, thank you. I do have a presentation this evening, so if you'll give me just a moment, I will share that with you. So first I want to start by sharing, we've obviously been working together in earnest over the last year, and prior to that, engaging the public and neighborhood stakeholders in developing the proposed revised historic design guidelines. And we are very, very close. That being said, we also feel a lot of obligation to ensure this document is as comprehensive, as correct, and as administrable as possible. So with that, extremely minor changes were made to every section with the exception of sections 2.9 through 2.22. I would certainly invite the board's comments on those clerical revisions, but my presentation will focus on sections 2.9 through 2.22, which is the architectural styles section. So with that, as part of staff's consideration of the Architectural Review Board comments on the proposed paint colors document, it became clear that the board was requesting greater alignment between the architectural styles established in the proposed paint colors document and the architectural styles established in the design guidelines. Staff took this comment and really took it in earnest and took another look at how we could establish that alignment and where there may be opportunities. So in the design guidelines, it became apparent that there was a discrepancy between architectural styles and building types. So in staff's analysis and interpretation, an architectural style is based on the elements of a building that make it identifiable to a particular period of time. And these may include design details and ornamentation. A building type is based on the form, floor plan, configuration, and number of stories. A building type, in our interpretation, is does not determine one architectural style or another. Building types of a similar form can occur under various architectural styles. So in July, the Architectural Review Board reviewed the following architectural styles and types. I want to bring your attention to the folk style in particular, including the gable front wing, and side gable, what were in July identified as architectural styles. You'll notice these architectural styles identified in July are very dissimilar from other architectural styles like Greek Revival, Gothic Revival, Queen Anne, and the labels gable front and wing, and side gable are really a reference to the form of the building. So with this November revision to the architectural styles section, staff has made updates to ensure consistency with the paint colors document and to ensure completeness and hopefully provide additional clarity. So first, the Adams building that was identified in the July version was changed to Federal, which may be a more common or wide-ranging identifier, although we do note it can also be called Adams or Regency. Additionally, Romanesque Revival was identified under the other category in the July version. We have provided it chronologically within the Romantic styles, as we do have an excellent example of Romanesque Revival in the St. John's Lutheran Church. In the folk Victorian style, you'll notice the removal of the building forms identified in July and the replacement with folk Victorian. Folk Victorian is a modest Victorian architectural style. Under the eclectic styles, we've expanded Colonial Revival to ensure clarity that it includes Dutch Colonial Revival and French Colonial Revival. The example of the Dublin Arts Council is a French Colonial Revival that you may be familiar with. We also added minimal traditional and contemporary. These are architectural styles that you may be familiar with under more colloquial names. So we also include those to ensure user friendliness. So as I summarized previously, the building types transition into architectural styles. Not all of the buildings listed under these 3 building forms get transferred to the categories shown on the screen. However, many of them, based on the dominant features of Greek Revival, Federal architecture, and folk Victorian and Queen Anne, do move to the categories identified on the screen. So I do want to focus on folk Victorian, given the transition of many of the buildings that were identified under the 3 building forms to this category. 2 examples of folk Victorian architecture are identified here. In the explanatory paragraph that introduces the folk Victorian section, we do note that folk Victorian and Queen Anne occur at similar points in time, and with the prevalence and affordability of some of the spindle work associated with Queen Anne elements get added to very simple folk Victorian homes. So we did, in many cases, revise the characteristics associated with these architectural styles to ensure they were as robust as possible and provided some clarity that a non-architect or a resident or someone without experience in historic preservation, architectural styles, or building types may be able to benefit from. So the idea is to really simplify that as much as possible. So with that, I would welcome any comments from the Architectural Review Board regarding the modifications, and I'm happy to go into each page in more detail and answer any questions.
Okay, who would like to start with, I think that the area we're going to be discussing the most has to do with the context and character sections. So I know a couple of you have some concerns. Gary, you want to get started?
Well, we can quibble about what exactly where something belongs in a particular style. So, but I appreciate what Nikki, you and the rest of staff are trying to do to get some correspondence between these guidelines and the paint color. So it makes it easier for people to to try to figure out what their house is and then what their paint color is. And my biggest question has to do with the way the word type is used, and also the elimination of type, because there are, and here's an example of the confusion in how it's used, I think, maybe I'm misinterpreting it. But on page 22, 2.9 said, and it talks about building type does not determine architectural style. And I agree with that. Everything in blue there, I agree 100% with. But then when you create on the next page, on page 23, the following list of architectural styles and subtypes. The word type is used it has two different ways, I think. And so one simple fix would be wherever you talk about subtype, just call that subcategory or sub something else. Because I think that would clarify the one point I have about the word being used, but it has two different meanings, and try to make the meaning more specific to the context in which it's being used. So that's the one point I have about the use of the word type. Now, I looked in both our last set of guidelines and then the brown book I have, and both of them use types as building form, because I do think it's possible to have a section that just says, here are building types that are typical in historic Dublin, because a lot of architects will look at the L-shaped building or the gable front building, and there are types that are specific to older buildings because of just the limitations of wood and the limitations of engineering. Like if you compare the types that you've had in your the last iterations and the shapes of those buildings to things in the form-based code and some of the building masses that they're showing, those are completely different building types that wouldn't be appropriate here. So there are two choices. You could, like I said, one might be just changing the word subtypes and everything's fine. But I do think a page saying, here are building types, because you've already made a nice differentiation, I think, on page 22 of style and type. And I think I agree, taking it out was helpful. So I don't dispute the way you've handled it. But so those are my only points. I appreciate the definitions and the way you've tried to be a little bit more specific. I appreciate that. I mean, Adams and Regency, when I was back in school in architectural history, they said those are primarily interior styles. But I don't, but you can find other texts that they were interior styles that were versions of federal, but because they were named after the Adams, who were these great interior designers in England. But that's equivalent.
Mr. Alexander, would you think that changing subtypes to substyles would address it, or would you prefer subcategories?
Amy's the architectural historian, so I don't know if substyles has a certain meaning that's appropriate, inappropriate in that context. I don't know. Subcategories is clearer to me, but that's just one opinion.
For me, I have to, as not an architect, as an engineer, more of a person who's a layman trying to read and trying to understand. I find it clear. I mean, I see type just to make sure that you keep straight of what the hierarchy is. But for me, I think it helps me be more clear on what I'm looking at and what I'm trying to pick between. So I appreciate, and for me, again, I appreciate all the effort that was done over the last 6 months to get to this spot. And for me, I would say as more of a layperson and learning as we go through these month by month, it adds clarity for me personally. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Sean. Amy?
Yeah, so in general, we're getting there. there's still, I know you're trying to move to style, but you're still mixing the two. Like they're still mixed. You're still calling things that are types styles. So you need to either get rid of all the types, or you need to do what Gary suggested and still include the types. So if you're looking at Ohio architecture, Ohio in general recognizes about 20, 25 types of houses. Okay. That would be like your I house, okay, which a lot of people know. We have it in downtown Dublin. It's a very common one. It has 3 or 5 bays wide across, 1 bay wide deep. It's 2 stories. That's a type. It's form and massing. Most I houses have a federal style, right? That's a very common thing people understand. So we need to either completely separate the two, or like I said, just make it clear. What I'll say is that for example, towards the back, you started putting types in. Okay. A ranch is a type of house. A ranch can be vernacular in style, have no academic style. A ranch could possibly have craftsman style elements or some other thing. But a ranch itself is a type, it's a form. It deals with, it's always 1 story in height. They typically have an attached garage. It's form and massing. So ranch, split level.
So, Amy, would you prefer that the ranch be reclassified to modern, and then we reference ranch as a building type under modern style?
If you want to say modern is anything, that's really hard to say. So you're trying, okay, not all buildings have an architectural style. Actually,
totally.
When you go out, when most of the time I go out, 50% at least, usually it's like 75%, have no academic style whatsoever. And it seems like we're trying way too hard to pigeonhole every property in downtown Dublin into a style, which it just doesn't have. When I would tell you, if I would look at most things in downtown Dublin, well over 50% of them have no academic style at all. None. But we're trying to say they do, and that's what my problem is. And I don't think we should list a property as being a Queen Anne when it has one element of a Queen Anne style house. It has, say, a turret or a spindly porch. Well, that's also characteristic of other styles too. So I think that's where the problem is. One thing that would help is when we're laying them out, you have examples, and then you have, let's see, let me go back to, okay, so you have, in like, you add, oh, here's a good example. Okay, so you use Romanesque Revival. You added it. It was something new. It was all in blue. You took it right out of Steve Gordon's How to Complete the OHI form. So it's perfect. It's great. That's exactly what we should do for every single one of these. We should just use his manual. Everything listed under characteristics are actually style elements. Okay. And then you have example, and then you have example with Romanesque Revival elements. So the difference is sometimes you can have a high style example where it has lots of the elements. It's clearly that's what it is. Other times you just have 1 or 2 little elements. So I think most of these, they're not examples. They're actually examples of the elements themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think what you need to do is go back through and under your characteristics, make sure you're actually listing the style characteristics. Use Steve Gordon's bullet points that he uses in the How to Complete the OHI, like you did with the Romanesque Revival one. Those are all style elements. Those aren't form. The fact that something has a hipped roof has nothing to do with its style. The only style where the roof really matters is Second Empire. It almost always has a mansard style roof. Lots of buildings have a gabled roof or a hipped roof, and it has nothing to do with its style. Likewise, whether it's 1-story or 2-story, has nothing to do with its style. You can have a 1-story craftsman, you can have a 1.5-story craftsman. Sometimes you have 2-story craftsmen. It's not as common.
Right. I think what we were trying to do is marry architectural styles and building types, and maybe we didn't necessarily do it successfully, but the idea was to provide some sort of guidebook for people who have no training in this field and might want to know.
Well, I think a good test would be like the Federal. Federal is often associated with the I-house. Those two marry. Those are good example. But a lot of those other styles, they just don't pair with anything else. It's not obvious that it has. I mean, maybe, yeah, I would say the Colonial Revival can be fairly typical. Particularly if you get a Dutch Colonial Revival, they almost always have the gambrel roof with the eaves. But
and maybe Greek Revival.
Greek Revival, again, it can be on a 1-story building, on a 2-story building. It's just Greek Revival. The style characteristic of that is it emphasizes height. It's going to have a very steep pitched gable somewhere. But
often a front gable.
Yeah, often a front-facing gable that's steeply pitched. You know, that is characteristic. But a lot of these, I think you're just trying to pigeonhole something that's not there.
Okay.
And I think it's gonna. I think you're just making it overly complicated. But my advice is, you obviously have Steve Gordon's book, and he has it divided into 2 sections. The first half is. I think the first half is architectural styles and the second half is architectural types. And they're clearly 2 very, very different things. And the other thing is, I know you really want to use that folk as a style, and it's just not a recognized Ohio style. It's not it's just not, it's a catch-all for vernacular, which is no academic style, is what it is. It's not used. If you record buildings in Ohio and want to put them on an Ohio Historic Inventorium, the folk style is not even an option. You can't even put it on there. Like, they have a drop-down list of like the 55 different styles you can pick, and folk is not, like, that style is not one of them. So I don't know that we should, in the guidelines, try to put every single address associated with the style. I just don't know that that's going to be possible. I
think the reason was to try to give people, a blueprint of.
And I think maybe we can create a reference list that the planning staff can have, that, like, when someone says, hey, what is this? Well, it has elements of Queen Anne. It has elements of this. We have it. This is what we have it. I just don't know that we should stick it in these guidelines for publication that we said such and such 54 South High Street is this type.
Sure. Gary?
One, it is kind of subjective, especially when they have multiple style elements.
Right.
So I don't know that I feel comfortable saying that those are the right ones, unless I physically looked at every single one and was, okay, and again, some of them are subjective. So I think it should be a spreadsheet that planning has, but not try to list every single one.
Gary, you were trying to speak earlier. Is there something?
Well, I'm sympathetic. I can see, and maybe I'm inferring this here, but we've been given this historic inventory. And when I read through that and looked at some of the classifications they've made for these houses, I was scratching my head saying, how can this house be that style? But, I think, and Nikki, you should tell me if I'm wrong, but my sense is the staff is trying to work with that. And if people look at that, it's a public document. And so they're trying to figure out a way, okay, how do we simplify the selection of paint colors for people and give them some guidance? And then how do we help them understand what their building is? And the city paid for this document that says your house is this. Now, I agree with Amy. I wouldn't consider a lot of those houses the style that the authors of that document suggest. But we have that document. And so I think my sense is the staff's been looking for some way to make things mesh a little bit more. I can understand Amy's approach, and I think it's clearly a more academic approach, and it's probably more accurate. And if we do that, then we probably have to go back and rethink how do you make recommendations on paint colors. You know, the correspondence of paint colors to style that I think Nikki and the staff were trying to do. That approach may have to be modified. So I'm sympathetic to they're trying to take all the resources we have and use them, but maybe we do have to make a break. If we wanted to be more accurate, we just have to make a break and paint color selection's a different way.
But I think it. So let's take the federal page, for example, which is 24. List the high style federal ones, the ones that like are really obvious federal. List those as examples if people want to go out. Keep those keep the pictures there. But then just keep a database of the other ones that you can put in the planning report and say that the consultant thought it might this, or it has these elements for the whole paint thing or whatever. And then, like I said, just make sure you, in the characteristics, include more of those style things and not so much of the form that could apply to all sorts of buildings.
Can I jump in here?
Sure.
So I'm tracking along here, and I think Amy, you make a good point. I think the need to keep this a little simpler is well stated. Keep in mind
we're
that
having trouble hearing you.
Okay, let me try to get a little closer. Okay, is that a little better?
Yeah.
I'll try to speak up. I think maybe stepping back also and thinking about how these are going to be used is important. So it seems to me like there's two different issues. One is to bring the alignment between the building styles and the paint colors. I understand that. But otherwise, the way these are used is just as a general background guide to the board when they're considering applications for modifications to these buildings. And remember, the board already has the flexibility to consider circumstances. There's language in here that talks about the importance of the board balancing a lot of different factors, the style, the condition, the context, the surroundings, and a lot of different things. So I think, having an understanding of the style that informs the board's decisions in considering application is really what this is all about. And I think the idea of, I think Andy makes a good point. On a case-by-case basis, you may say, if you look at our inventory, this had pieces of this style, it has pieces of that style. It's not classically or academically any one particular thing. So that helps us understand how we're going to process an application for modification. So I think going back and trying to simplify this a little bit makes a lot of sense.
Well, I kind of agree. I think we're trying to have this do too many things, and we're using, the foundation of all of this is definitions that, to Amy's point, aren't necessarily consistent with what we're seeing in the district. And a report that was done that we're using as the foundation for a lot of discussions. And I makes me question, and to Sean's point, maybe we shouldn't be using that cultural assessment report as our foundation. It seems to be causing us more trouble than value add.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think though, if you think of that report as more analogous to a plan, right, as more analogous to a policy, not a regulation, right? It's not a regulatory document. It's a background document. And again, the board already has the flexibility to consider a lot of different factors, and as it weighs the different factors, it can still be a valuable guide, but it doesn't
Sure.
have to be considered a blueprint.
But what we've been trying to do here is some of this stuff would never come to us if we can make this guideline more user friendly. But I feel like we're trying to, shove a square peg in a round hole here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess while we're having this open dialogue, I would also like to add a few things because I think this is very good and constructive, at least for me, to make sure when we do bring something back to you, it's as complete and as capturing, what you want. So just for some background, and I'm sure you all remember this, but when we established the guidelines are in two parts. There's kind of the user guide, the introduction, and the guidelines themselves do not begin until chapter 4. So we're in chapter 2, and not that makes it any less important, but it is supposed to provide that background for the user and not necessarily be a determinant in the decision making. That being said, I think perception has a lot to do with it. So since it's in the guidelines, it will be viewed as a guideline. So I think it is really important that we keep working on this. The other couple items I want to just raise for us to consider as we work through this. There are a couple ways to do paint colors, and it's probably important to talk about this now. Certain paint colors are and were popular in certain decades or multiple decades, and certain architectural styles were also most popular in certain decades or multiple decades. And they don't always completely align, right? The architectural stuff is a very muddy field. So we could potentially the paint colors, we could back off the architectural styles and go to decades. That being said, there will still be overlap. So on the fringes of certain decades, you may have incorrect recommendations, especially for buildings. We have very few high style buildings, but maybe a high style building wouldn't necessarily have the best recommendations. So the paint colors document, I think, will be great, but it won't necessarily be a one size fits all solution.
Well, no, because the 70s was not a good look, so I wouldn't want to have to use any of those colors.
Right. So we did back check. I do want to tell you, we did back check the historic and cultural assessment. So these categorizations of buildings are actually not based on the historic and cultural assessment, because to Amy's point, the historic and cultural assessment sheets are trying to mimic an OHI file, which is the Ohio Historic Inventory. And if it's not a recognized building style or type in Ohio, they cannot select it. So obviously we've included ones that aren't an option in Ohio. And so in order to categorize these buildings, we started by looking at the year. You'll notice the ones in the federal category are the oldest, and everything becomes newer as you work toward the end of this chapter. And so we first did it by year, and then after we did it by year, we reviewed the photos of each building to assess the elements that would determine which category it fell into. So I've heard at some previous meetings about us really being critical of the information that is presented to us and not kind of just plopping it in wherever it might fit. So I want you to know without me belaboring this any further, that we really did spend a lot of time thinking about this.
But I think what you're saying right now, I think is worthy of a couple of paragraphs or a page in this book. Is what is the process? Because somebody else who might have any of these people's background would come into this, and it was like, well, how did you get there? And rather than have that discussion every time, I think that having a document or a page that just says this is the process that we use to get here, I think would be really helpful, because the answer may be different depending on what process you come up with. And all of you have said this is very subjective. So, let's allow for that.
Because certainly at the minute I feel like we're getting into a very academic area, right?
Yes.
And I'm not an architect, but for me, I mean, if I'm a homeowner, there's a few things I want to know, especially in the district. How am I going to deal with the staff? How am I going to deal with the board? And how am I going to deal with my own personal architect to do what I need to do?
Yeah.
And when I read these, at least I see what you're trying to do, irregardless of let's say type or form and style. So I think we're at a tipping point where we either going to say it's going to be a academic kind of thing, and we're really going to try to find our way to get to the answer, so to speak, or we're going to use it as a guide to get people to understand which way they're going. And right now, I feel like we're going down the academic path, which to me, personally, I don't think that's the right path.
No, I don't think it is either.
I think we can simplify it without doing really the academic. We can keep it. So rather than try to pigeonhole everything into a style, so what I would suggest, like the page you have on Folk Victorian, all three buildings there are gabled L building type. It's a known building type. Everywhere in Ohio, extremely common. It's also very well known that building type was usually built between like 1865 and 1885. They might have run a little later. So you still get your time period that you're looking for. Even though there's no style, they're vernacular, there's no academic style. They're all gabled outhouses, and that was a common time period they were built. So you can use building type to come up with the age of the building you're looking at. It's not that you can't use one or the other. You can use the building type of ranch to know how old it was. I mean, ranches started being built in the 50s, so the age of the building, but it's a building type. Likewise with split level or two-story, all building types, but you know exactly when they were built. Cape Cod is another one. It's a building type, but everyone knows Cape Cods were built in like the 30s. So it's totally fine to use the building type to come up with the age, because it's very well known in Ohio the time period those types were built. So I'm not saying you can't use building type. I'd prefer, rather than say this is a folk Victorian style, I'd rather you say it's a gabled L type and it was built during those years.
But we're back where we started.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying you don't have to pick one or the other, and you don't have to pigeonhole. Every building has a style or a type, and sometimes it has a style like and no determinable type, or sometimes it has no determinate. You don't need both, is what I'm saying. You can have a vernacular building that is an iHouse or a vernacular ranch.
And so I guess before we go any further, do you all think that the July version captured what we were trying to convey better? I mean, because it would be really easy to revert back to that version.
Wow, I have July right here. They're the early one.
Me too. They follow me everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, I think another thing maybe to be thinking through or considering is we could add, or a hybrid, we could add back in some of the building type, building form parts for reference to get to your point. And then is it worth eliminating the identification of specific properties? It's more of, here are the various styles, and that's the end of it?
Yeah, I think you use all the styles and types that you have now. and clearly call them a style or a type. So make sure your ranch is a type. And the only one I would recommend is delete full Victorian and call them gabled L's. And then add a section about vernacular. It's okay to say something has no academic style. And you can throw all those miscellaneous examples of, that's okay. And then, so use those, delete the specific styles unless there's like a really high style or very obvious example, which you've put the pictures for. And I think you're there. I mean, I don't know that you need to make huge changes.
Can I make a suggestion? Amy, I don't want to volunteer you, but I'm going to. If you work directly with Nikki on this over the next whatever amount of time, I can a little bit,
but honestly, I do this for a living and get paid a lot of money to do it. So you're my free advice right now.
I understand. My concern is that Nikki or staff is going to make another change and they're going to bring it back and it's going to be, well, you didn't quite get it right.
If you have questions, you can. I mean, I'll certainly review it for the meeting.
Let's make sure. Let's do that.
If you have questions beforehand, I'll certainly review it beforehand. I just can't.
I think that's really important. Yeah.
But at the end, what's the purpose we're trying to get to now? Now I might be a bit. Now I'm starting to lose because originally we were trying to get it specific enough to give more information to homeowners and staff, right? So to not to say cut us out of the loop, but it was to help us try to understand how things fit together. If I listen to Amy, it sounds like that maybe is not possible in a certain sense. And so I don't want staff to go back and try to rewrite everything, and we get to the point where we're still going to review all the paint colors anyways. I'm not sure I quite know how we're trying to get to the end, because if the paint colors have to come and we use a generic guideline to try to help people, staff finds a way to push through and we review them all, for me, it's okay. That wasn't the original intent. So I just want to make sure we give staff enough way to go forward. So because I agree, in another 2 months we'll come back and I'm not sure we will hit the mark. Huh?
We really need to move this along and not give conflicting messages. So I think that, to your point, Sean, I think we were, like I said earlier, we were trying to use something that already existed and kind of morph it for the paint colors, but maybe it's not the same thing. Maybe we need, Amy suggested a spreadsheet or something. I don't know that it's a good idea to have every address for every type, because I think you're really inviting yourself to somebody saying, well, that's not my house type. It's needless discussion. So I think Amy talked about, showing pictures when something's very clearly that style. I think that's great, but I wouldn't list all the addresses. Now, if you want to have that, again, to her point, for in your office for consultation with somebody on paint colors, that's fine. But yeah, I think maybe we're trying to do too many things with this document.
Yeah, I think we should just simplify this chapter.
But to Sean's point, I think the most valuable part of this is not the styles, but the type. Because when you have people who want to put, and those diagrams of types, and you wouldn't classify them. I looked at the old one and it was saying things like, it had a style, but things like gable front wing building type, side gable building type, those definitions are very easy for people beginning to plan a home or thinking about an addition. With simple diagrams that I think are extremely valuable, so they have a sense of the shape of the buildings that are in the district. And for me, as a design professional, I think that would be one of the most valuable parts of the front part of this.
Thanks, Gary. So, Nikki.
Yeah. Could we have been less helpful? Let's see.
To your point, though, I think we do need some of these building types. And I think it would be clear if you did all the types in one section, all next together, like chronicle by age, and then do all the styles, you know, rather than mix the two back and forth, because then it's clear. You have a heading that says architectural types, and you have the gabled L's and the wings and the, we might have a 4/4 somewhere in there. We might have, you know, and then do the styles.
So, Amy, I tend to agree with you because I really like categories. It's my happy place as a planner. But I guess the only thing I'm feeling a little conflicted about, right, is some of us were saying, let's simplify this. And I feel like if we build up the building types into a large substantive section, and then we have the architectural styles.
Well, I think honestly, we only have maybe 5 types, maybe. We have a ranch, a 2-story, an I-house, a bungalow, bungalow.
Yeah.
Do we even have Cape Cod? Do we have Cape Cod down there, maybe?
I think we have like 1 or 2 examples,
okay,
but
so,
I think that,
okay,
sorry,
so
one more.
It's not going to be a huge list.
Right. I guess my concern is what Sean was saying, that this becomes a very academic exercise and is maybe not useful to the layperson.
Well, I think if you make it clear that you might have a building, you might be able to find your building type, but you're not going to find your building style, because
I don't think most people are going to know what the difference is, Amy.
It won't matter. They'll look and they'll see one or the other. They won't, you know what I mean? They're not going to realize that. They'll see a picture and they'll be like, oh, okay, it's a ranch. So what I'm saying is, if you can put them both in there, but you can say that you can have a ranch that has no style. No, it has no academic style. You're not going to have a Queen Anne ranch. I don't think it's as confusing as you think.
Yeah, the type is just, I agree. The type is just maybe 6 diagrams. I mean,
yeah,
it's like the diagrams.
It's not that many.
Yeah, and I think
we've got them already in the July version.
Yeah, we have all the stuff there. I don't think we don't have to write a huge thing about it. Just show the people a picture. You know, this is what a ranch looks like. This is what a split level looks like. So they know what to call their house. That's all they're looking for.
Yeah, so I could, just talking this through, so I feel like we're in a very collaborative session right now. I could do a 2-page spread with 3 pictures, 3 building forms on each side, and then a small description. That's a much more manageable way to address the building types. I'm thinking out loud, and this would be obviously subject to your participation, but maybe Gary and Amy, if I was to send you an outline prior to executing significant changes, because I'm sure, as you guys can appreciate, it obviously takes significant staff resources to make these changes and then to undo them. So just want to be mindful of not only my time, but the people who are helping us do this.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. Yeah. And Lisa,
Gary, are you okay with that?
Oh, definitely. Sure. I'd be happy to review it. Yeah.
And honestly, I think if you pull the descriptions from the how to complete the OHI manual, and you keep them short and simple and sweet, and you just put the ranch and then put the years and then a photo, a couple sentences of what it is, and then just make it clear to people, you know, these are building types. Not all building types have a style. And then you go into the styles. Here's the style. You might have these styles on your building type. You might not.
Okay. So I'm envisioning that we open with an overview, go into the building types, and then work toward the detailed architectural styles that you may or may not have.
Yeah, and I would discuss the styles as, hey, you may have these elements. Like, I mean, we don't have any prime Queen Anne houses in Dublin or anything. I mean, you might have some elements, but all that, you know, if they're just curious, if, hey, you know, when was this particular, my house kind of looks like this. When was it built? That gives them a general overview. And you could tie that to the paint colors by decade, you know, hey, these are the decades that these paints were available during these decades, which your house was built in. And
Yeah.
And Nikki, I would try to be simple here. I mean, for me, at the end of the day, we want people to be able to be quite honest. If I live down there, I'm not sure it would, the type could make a difference, but we're really trying to help them find their way through a certain process, right? Just if they buy a house and they want to know the form of the type, I guess that's something for them. But if you make it really simple, then we're going to use it for, and keep in mind, we're trying to use it for a certain purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you, Sean. Not all of us know the difference.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to change the text one bit on page 22 to do exactly what we're talking about, because along that page, you clearly differentiate type and style, and you decouple type from style on that page. So I think what's being proposed works really well with the text and the way you've already differentiated these.
Okay, great. I appreciate that confirmation. That's helpful.
Good. Okay. Nikki, is there anything else you need from us? You know you have Gary and we have all of us, but specifically Gary and Amy, because they're their bailiwick. But you need anything else, any other help, please let us know.
Okay.
If you need to send it to a non-expert, send it to me and I can tell it makes sense.
Yeah.
There you go. That's perfect.
Yeah. We can, I used to call it when I was doing software development, the stupid user test. So, you know, if somebody who knows nothing can do it, then you've passed stupid user test. So that's my job.
And I recommend if there is ever a budget that you buy the How to Complete the Ohio Historic Inventory book for all the other members on the board who do not have it. Because
I just looked it up on Amazon and it was like $75. And it's
I think you can buy it from the preservation office.
We'll find the money because I think this is beneficial to all.
Well, I think it's still in print through the preservation office. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
It's funny. Mine is so beat up. I use it like daily, but it still has the price tag on it. It was $14.99 like 25 years ago.
Yeah, Amazon at 75. So it's like
if the city could get that book for the board members, even if they're on loan and you give them to the next board member who comes around, I think it would be an excellent resource.
Merry Christmas to all of you.
And to all a good night.
I'm sure. Well, thank you all very much. I think this has been a good discussion. It's great work and great teamwork. So appreciate it all. Is there any communication?
I think actually we need you to make a recommendation to table this request so we can make a modification.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's good communication.
Back to
So I need a motion to, it's late. My brain is late. What am I supposed to do?
Just table the request based on the discussion.
To table this case.
Thank you.
Team effort.
I second it.
Mr. Alexander?
Yes.
Ms. Bryan?
Yes.
Mr. Cotter?
Yes.
Ms. Cram?
Yes.
Okay. Now, are there any communications?
There are. We do have a couple. So many of you may have received emails regarding headshots for new badges. I know many of you have completed that or emailed a professional headshot in. If you don't have a professional headshot to email and haven't already been in connection with those folks, if you could do so, at least reach out to them before the end of the week and get something on the books sooner rather than later. We'd really appreciate that. Second thing, we do have an upcoming joint meeting with various other boards and commissions, as well as City Council on December 14th. As part of that, Council is looking for topics that may be of value for various boards to discuss. I think that maybe some of those topics may have been highlighted here this evening, particularly in regards to the Board of Zoning Appeals, who you all don't get a lot of exposure to, and vice versa. So if you as board members have any items that you'd like to discuss at the joint meeting, you can either send them to us, or you can send them to the administrative liaisons on council, which would be Jane Fox, would probably be the best contact. So with that, Jenny, do you have anything else to add?
No, other than, did everyone let us know that you can or cannot attend that meeting on the 14th, December 14th? It'll be virtual, and my understanding is it starts at 6 o'clock, but I just want to make sure I think, Gary, you may have had a conflict and not be able to attend.
That's correct. At this time, I have a conflict. That could change, but right now I have a conflict.
Did that date though work for everybody else in time?
Yep, works for me. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. And I think I might be the last one about the headshots. I've got that scheduled.
Okay, great. No, I didn't have anything else but again, thank you for your discussion, and I know that was great collaboration and solution. No, we want it to be correct, as Nikki said. I mean, the whole point of this time and effort is to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with what we're bringing forward, and we're not creating more problems or challenges. So again, I appreciate the dialogue and the
Amy, you're our pain in the butt.
Jenny's been dealing with me for years on code stuff in general. So
I'm counting on your comments, Amy. So that's all good. We came to a good place here. So
yeah, we did. And it'll be better for the discussion. So thank you all very much. If there's nothing else, I adjourn this meeting.
All right. Thanks.
Great. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry I was late.
I'm going to stop the recording and disconnect from the live stream. So if everyone could just pause.
Sorry.